This is a diagram from David Holmgren, who is one of the co-founders of the permaculture movement. Holmgren understood the concepts of peak oil, peak everything, and ecological devastation. And the book, where one of the first versions of this energy descent diagram appeared, was about possible routes forward. Western civilization has gone through this tremendous ascent. We've climbed to the peak of the mountain with respect to consumerism, consumption of world resources, consumption of energy. We're at the very peak. So what are our alternatives as we cross that peak? Holmgren described 4 alternatives. In the first scenario, which he calls the tech fantasy scenario, which some people call the Brown scenario, we say, hey, pay no attention to all those things we've just been discussing with respect to biocapacity, climate change. Forget about all that and just go shopping. Now, we actually had a president tell us this not that many years ago. Ignore what's going on in the world and just go shopping. Keep the economy flying along at the levels which everyone has become accustomed. Now, the problems with this should be obvious. We're experiencing climate disruptions. We're at peak or post-peak on multiple resources. We can't continue on like this. You'll notice that Holmgren labeled this as a fantasy scenario. The second scenario that Holmgren shows us, he calls the green tech stability model. This is where we say, okay, we know about the growth thing. We know that isn't good. So we won't grow. We'll just stay stable. We'll just continue right on where we are. We'll just sub out greener practices for all the things we have problems with. You say we're running out of oil? Well, then we'll just switch over to solar and wind. We'll just make the change. It sounds nice, and a lot of environmentalists, knowingly or unknowingly, endorse this concept. You've even got economic models which fall into this category, like the steady state economy model. But there's 4 major problems with this green tech stability model. The first is the idea of energy density. Oil gives us tremendous clout. It is a highly dense substance. It gives us a lot of mind-boggling amount of energy per unit, and we really do not have an equivalent replacement. When you dig into the science of wind and hydrogen and solar, you'll find out that each of them have significant limitations. They just do not have the energy density that we have become accustomed to with oil. The second major problem with this scenario is infrastructure. This is something that industries and governments are scrambling to remedy, but if we are to make this jump from fossil-based operations to greener operations, the climate emergency says we have to do it now. We have to do it today, not some point in the distant future, and right now we just simply do not have the infrastructure to support it. Right now when we need to make the shift. Now, the third problem with the green tech scenario is an economic issue. Everything in our current economy, from corporate profits to the stock market, to your expectations about your salary over the course of your career, to your expectations about the value of a house or interest rates, they're all built on the concept of growth. We expect them all to be growing over time. The adjustment from a grow economy to a flat, steady state economy is a substantial adjustment. It will not be painless. We will feel the ouch. But arguably, the biggest problem with the green tech scenario is where we draw the line. Look at where it is in the image, right up about where we are now. At the very peak. Where are we now? In North America, we gobble resources at about 5 planets worth of consumption. We can't call a steady state at that level of consumption. We've got to adjust to something more in line with one single planet. So what happens if we ignore the problem for a little bit longer or we tie ourselves in knots debating about it and do nothing to change our ways. Well, that's where we have the red line scenario, the collapse scenario, the Mad Max scenario, as in, hey, I got my gun, have you got yours? This is a scenario of dire shortages and conflict over what is left. 2020 and toilet paper hold nothing to what this scenario anticipates. For more than 15 years, I've been working to keep us out of this scenario. I hope you'll join me. Now, Holmgren offers us one additional scenario. This he calls the idea of creative descent or energy descent. Some people call this the permaculture scenario. Holmgren points out that climbing up the mountain took tremendous amounts of human creativity and ingenuity to design all the things we see around us. He says, why couldn't we use similar amounts of creativity and ingenuity to design a way out of those problems? There's one thing we need to notice about this scenario, and it's really important. The creative descent scenario is a descent. It necessarily includes a direction change from 5 planets worth of consumption and more, back to something more in line with what one small planet can realistically deliver. That's a significant adjustment. Now remember, we said earlier that everything in our economy is geared toward more, eternal growth. Well, the permaculture scenario understands that we don't have 5, 6, 7, 8 planets to derive resources from for all those fantasies of growth. This scenario understands that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. We've got to make the adjustment. So the permaculture scenario is one of designing a path that peels back away from 5 planets worth of consumption into consuming resources in a way that is more appropriate, more just and fair than most of us have ever seen in our lifetimes.